Welcome back to the 127 Fit podcast. Today's guest is Miss Bikini Colorado, and she is also a wellness coach. Today's guest is Kristina Martinez. Kristina, I want to welcome you to the 127 Fit podcast.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here.
For sure. So, Kristina, we're just going to jump right into things. I've got 4 questions that I'd like to ask all of my guests. The first question that I have for you is, how do you start your day? Do you have a specific morning routine or morning ritual you like to stick to on most mornings?
I always say that I'm a wind up and wind down person. So I have very set morning and nighttime routines.
Mm-hmm.
However, I got a puppy about 2 months ago, so that has thrown everything out the window.
Uh-huh.
So what I still stick to is before I get out of bed, I name 5 things that I'm grateful for. And I also set my intention for the day. Okay, cool.
Now, in regards to kind of like the 5 things you're grateful for, because definitely a reoccurring theme on the podcast is most of the time it's in the morning routine, but just overall, most of my guests have some sort of gratitude practice. Mm-hmm. So for you personally, Kristina, like where did that kind of come into play in your life in regards to gratitude and the importance of kind of winding up, so to speak, using gratitude for your days?
Honestly, that started in the middle of my divorce.
Okay.
I really wanted to shift things into a more positive mindset, and I continually heard that by practicing gratitude, if you're grateful, you can't be angry.
Right, for sure. Mm-hmm.
So I really wanted to shift that and start my day on the right foot, so to speak.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, the second question that I have for you, and for the next 3, actually, you can, if there's more than one, feel free to share. Don't feel like, oh man, I can only share one. But the next question is favorite book or book that you like to gift often.
Sure. Probably the one that I gift the most often is Oprah's What I Know for Sure.
Okay.
That was a super powerful book for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Christmas, I recently gifted Gabby Bernstein's Super Attractor. And
Okay.
I have not had a chance to read it yet, but it is on my shelf.
Okay, cool. Now, in regards to Oprah's book, What I Know for Sure, is there maybe kind of like one takeaway or something that was super valuable that you kind of remember from that book for you specifically?
Honestly, it's been so long now. It was probably 2 to 2.5 years ago that I read it, so it's been a while.
Yeah.
But I just know that it was very uplifting, very positive. I mean,
For
that's
sure.
how Oprah is,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So always
Okay,
turning
cool.
kind of a dark situation into something positive.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. The next question, favorite quote, mantra, or word. Now, like, I like to just preface this that we all go through different seasons in life, right? There's ups, there's downs, there's light, there's darkness, and everything in between. So you can kind of take this however you want. So if this is a favorite quote, mantra, or word for maybe this season of life, or maybe for a previous season of life, however you wanna take it. Again, just it's your call. But favorite quote, mantra, or word.
Okay. And those all speak to me pretty deeply. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely a quote and mantra person. Oddly enough, I kind of have my mantras come to me. I don't necessarily latch onto something and go with that.
Mm-hmm.
Weirdly, the one that came to me this morning was stay true to your power.
Mm.
And I'm not entirely sure what that's intending for me or what that's supposed to mean, but I'm guessing that I will figure that out in the days or week to come.
Mm-hmm.
A quote that recently spoke to me that is very similar to my mindset was Anne Frank saying, I don't think of the misery, I think of the beauty that remains.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that no matter what, there's beauty in everything.
For sure.
And again, kind of going back to that, focusing on positivity.
Mm-hmm.
I believe a lot in law of attraction.
For sure.
And so what you focus on is what you attract back to yourself. What you
100%.
put out into the world is what comes back to you. So.
Absolutely. Now, when like that kind of like that mantra or that saying that came to you this morning, stay true to your power, like for you personally, I haven't released his episode yet, but earlier this week I had a guest on, and he was just talking about, like our different powers as human beings, and how we can, some people recognize their powers, some people don't. Some people that recognize their powers, they use them for good. Some people that recognize their powers use them for bad. And then also the people that don't really recognize their powers, they use them for good, they use them for bad. So it was a very interesting conversation. And I do believe as human beings, we do have, different powers. You'll hear a lot of people, especially like on social media, talking about like, my superpower is this or my superpower is that. I don't know about all of that, but I do definitely believe that as human beings, like we have power, right? And I think maybe different people have different perspectives on that. But for you, Kristina, kind of like, what do you think is maybe like your power or some powers that you have and that you use for positivity?
That's a tough one. So I have a business coach that is trying to pull out my superpowers, and I have a really hard time identifying that. Helping others, I think, is just something that comes very natural to me.
Yeah.
And the ability to not just listen, but to hear.
What does that mean? Explain that. That's good.
I think, first time saying that. I think so many times we get kind of caught up in our own heads when we're having a conversation.
Right.
I set intentions a lot for genuine connections, deep, genuine conversation.
Right.
And I think that's very different than the typical conversation that happens during the day. So I think a lot of times we're in conversation, but we're not in conversation.
Yeah.
We're not paying attention to what the other person is actually saying. We're not listening, both in terms of their body language and what they're saying, and how they're saying it. And so I think that there's a whole lot more to a conversation than just the words that are passing.
For sure. And that to me, that kind of sounds like just being present, right?
Sure,
being where your feet are at, right?
Yeah.
I think that's something within our culture. Just because we're so fast-paced, we got the social media. There's a million different things kind of coming into, our being, and I think that's something that even for me personally, like I've really tried to focus on is like being where I'm at, like not allowing my mind to wander off over here or wander off over there, not thinking about like what I need to do later in the day or tomorrow or a week from now. It's like Quentin, like just right here, right now, this is where you're at, and just, feel it, absorb it, live it, all that type of stuff. Because I know for me, when I allow my mind to kind of like wander off, that's where like some of those anxious thoughts might come in, right? Absolutely. And then you just kind of start getting overwhelmed, but there's something going on where your feet are at right here, and because you're not present, because you're not listening, hearing, just like fully engaged where you're at, like you have an opportunity to miss out on some stuff, right? So that's huge. Like listening to people, being present, like with them, being with them, right? So now I just like this is the first time we've ever met in person, right? And we've only gotten through like 3 questions, but I mean something that I'm already like sensing and feeling in our conversation is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but do you have like a hard time of like putting yourself out there, and like do you feel like you're kind of like more of like a humble person? Like is it hard for you to like just like say like this is who I am and like this is my power and like look at me? Like is that hard for you?
I would say so. I have a much easier time lifting others up.
Right, of course. Yeah. I get that sense because I'm the same way. Like it's so hard for me. Especially like being in the fitness realm, like fitness pages. That's like for us guys, it's like you got to have like your shirt off, you got to be like flexing, like all this stuff. And I've told people like that's not me. Like I'm not gonna have my Instagram page is not gonna be me with my shirt off a bunch and like flexing and doing all these gym shots, because like that doesn't make me feel good, and that's just not me, right? So, and I would much rather like elevate other people and just like promote other people. And I've had some people, and I'm sure maybe you having like kind of like a coach that's helping you with like business side of things, maybe she said this, but I've had some people kind of like business type people saying, hey, like you've got to like have your website and you've got to be like the picture's got to be you and you got to promote yourself. And I'm like I understand all that to a certain degree, but it's like at the end of the day, like it's it's not just going to be all me. Like, because it just doesn't feel right to me. You know what I mean? So
right.
maybe you can relate to that a little bit.
I feel like that's relating back to actually my mantra that came to me this morning.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, we could get into a story later, but I had a breakdown on a beach during the middle of a photo shoot because of that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll come back to that. That'll be interesting. Favorite, last question for the conversational warm up. Favorite or most listened to podcast?
Ooh, I listen to so many. But I will say, in reference to one of your other podcasts, your guest mentioned YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And so I listen across the board on podcasts, but what I listen to a lot, going back to Law of Attraction, is Abraham Hicks on YouTube.
Okay.
When I'm getting ready in the morning.
Awesome.
That just kind of sets me up for my day.
For sure. Now, is there somebody, Kristina, maybe like an influencer type person on Instagram or on social media, or maybe it's somebody else on YouTube, maybe like within the fitness space that you really look up to, or you kind of respect the message that they put out there?
Again, there's a lot, and I think it depends on where my area of focus is at that moment.
For sure.
But one of my good friends and mentors is India Paulino, and I mean, she stays true to her power.
For sure, yeah.
And she's a powerful being, such a beautiful person inside and out, and so I just really look up to her.
Cool.
Yeah.
Love it.
Loved her guidance, so she's helped me through some stuff.
Cool. All right, so we're going to kind of just take a step into your childhood experience. So if you don't mind sharing with myself and the listeners, Kristina, where did you grow up? What were some of those earlier years like? And then once we kind of just, talk a little bit about that, unpack that a little bit, we'll just kind of move along with your story.
Okay. May have to make this a little bit brief.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I know there's a lot. So.
There is a lot. Childhood-wise, I was born and raised in Denver.
Okay.
Grew up in the Denver metro. We moved pretty frequently. My family's asking me to make a graph of this now, but I'm in my 40-something house that I'm living in. Haven't quite reached the age of 40, so it's a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
And my parents got divorced when I was 3. My mom remarried when I was 6, and my dad remarried when I was 8. Each one had 2 kids, so I have 4 brothers and sisters.
Okay.
And so that's childhood in a nutshell. It was a very abusive household that I grew up in. And so that was for about 10 years. So from the time that I was 6 until I was 16, while my mom was married to my stepdad. And I don't know, I have a lot of family, big family, and most of my family is in Denver. And I'm still here, so.
So in regards to kind of maybe sports or just school activities, what was kind of your outlet for school in regards to just kind of your activities, was it music, anything like that?
Gymnastics and cheerleading.
Okay, cool.
So I started gymnastics when I was 3, gymnastics and dance, as much as that is involved at 3 years old.
Right.
And then I started cheerleading in middle school.
Okay, cool. And so did you find, because of some of the dynamics of your home environment, did you find gymnastics and cheerleading and things like that, did you kind of find those things to be kind of a little bit of an escape or maybe an outlet for you?
Absolutely. It created a safe space for me. And maybe a space where I could kind of let my guard down. I could be myself. It was a chance for kind of engaging in play. Right. That I didn't necessarily get to do and have at home.
Okay. And before we move on, kind of post high school and stuff, was there somebody an adult that was kind of a mentor for you, or somebody that was you were able to kind of lean on outside of maybe what was going on with the adults in your life at home?
several people. I usually became very close with my teachers.
Okay.
When I was going to elementary school, at that time they had grades combined. So I had the same teacher for 5th and 6th grade, Mrs. Dickinson, and she was a huge support and mentor for me. And I ended up moving the last month of 6th grade, and she even offered to come pick me up every morning and bring me back to school, which I actually turned down. I said that I wanted to meet some kids in the neighborhood before I started summer break. But yeah, I had a lot of really powerful adults in my life. I think outside of my home environment, the most important person, or two, I guess, were my grandmother and my aunt.
And so, like, were you able to just kind of like, how did those three ladies, Mrs. Dickinson and your grandma and your aunt, were you able to just kind of like open up to them, or was it just kind of like them being very just loving to you and just, again, maybe creating a safe place or a safe space for you? What was that kind of dynamic like with those three ladies specifically?
All of them I was able to open up to. My aunt I probably was the most open with and forthcoming in terms of things that were going on at home. I think adults have a very difficult time believing children when they're telling various stories. And so I think that was one of the biggest challenges was that people didn't necessarily think I was being honest or truthful.
For sure.
But my grandma is probably the one person that I would say I've experienced unconditional love with. And my aunt took me in as if I were her own daughter. So, I mean, just huge supports, and not entirely sure where I would be without them.
Right. So if somebody that's listening to this, and we're not going to get into the details of some of those things that you went through in your childhood, but if somebody's listening to this, Kristina, and they are going through maybe some sort of abuse or neglect, what have you, what is something that maybe you can just like share with them to kind of like help them make it through this time in their life?
Sure. So I will say the abuse and the dynamic at home as a child was very different than the abusive, toxic marriage that I was in. And so I think there were a lot more lessons and takeaways that I have from the marriage as an adult. As a child, you're in a very kind of helpless situation. It's hard to take that power in that moment. But probably in both, I think it's critical to find that safe space for yourself. In a space in which you can grow and learn what your strengths are and focus on building yourself up. I will credit my time in the sport of bodybuilding for doing that as an adult, and really created the inner strength for me, as well as creating a network of support. And I think those are two critical things if you're in a challenging situation like that, and not necessarily to think that you need to get out right this minute. I think it's really important to kind of build that foundation and take that time to make sure that you're going to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. When you make that decision.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. All right, so what did kind of like, once you got done with high school, what did kind of like the first several years post-high school look like for you?
So I graduated from high school and went to Colorado State University for 2 years.
All right.
And I was majoring in psychology and exercise science. And then I had a roommate who convinced me to go into occupational therapy. So I had never heard of OT before. And that's what her career path was. And at the time, I was volunteering at CSU on a board called Up Till Dawn for St. Jude. And I was super passionate about those kiddos in that program. And so for whatever reason, I created this story in my head that the only way I could actually work with those kids was to be an OT. So I hated school. I did well in school, but I had to work really hard for it.
Right.
So I decided to look into other OT programs. At that time, it was transitioning from a bachelor's to a master's requirement. And I found 3 schools in the country that still had a bachelor's. CSU had already transitioned to a master's requirement.
Oh, okay.
So I applied to all 3, got into all 3, and then opted to go with Florida International University in Miami.
Oh, cool.
So my junior year of school, I moved down to FIU.
Okay. Now, what is an occupational therapist? Like, what does that kind of entail in regards to jobs and things like that?
All OTs will laugh at this question. It is one of the most difficult questions to answer.
Okay.
So occupation, not referring to a job, but referring to what occupies your day.
Okay.
So if you're talking about a child, play is what occupies their day. As an adult, we have, in the hospital setting, we'll work with basic activities of daily living. So dressing, bathing, toileting, eating. And then my background specifically, I worked in neuro for about most of my career, so probably about 12 of the 15-ish years that I was in OT.
Okay.
And so a lot of my work was cognitive. So it was processing, executive functioning, being able to make a decision, being able to drive a car, being able to work, go to school, you know, whatever kind of was entailed cognitively, having a conversation. So there was a lot more that was involved in it. And then there is some physical component too. We work very closely with physical therapy and speech therapy.
Oh, okay. So is it, so like, and I know with an occupational therapist, like it depends kind of like the population you're working with in regards to kind of like what the details of your specific duties or job are going to be. But just like kind of like, I guess, generalizing or generally speaking with an occupational therapist, is there like, because like when I think of when I hear the word therapist, right, I think of like I'm going to see somebody and I'm going to basically like unload on them in the sense of like what I'm going through and, you know, like counseling type stuff. Is that some of what an occupational therapist does with certain populations of people, or is it more kind of like what you would think of maybe like a physical therapist helping them, you know, move more, play more, rehab, stuff like that? What is kind of like the, I guess, the inner workings of an occupational therapist?
So in my wellness coaching business, I say I practice with a holistic approach with a W. So it's a whole person approach.
Yeah.
And that's how OT is driven, is it's looking at the whole person, the person as a whole. So you're looking at mind, body, spirit. So OTs are very much aligned with physical therapy. So you would, I think in terms of kind of what you picture, you would be going to see kind of your physical therapist or OT post an injury or an accident. It is more of like that rehab realm. But we also deal a lot with the psychology, the mental health, and the cognitive components, you know, in terms of the head.
So there's a possibility to do a lot of different things within kind of the realm of being an occupational therapist. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, you could almost do anything within the realm of a career and tie it back to OT. Interesting.
And then I believe you said that all the programs now, if you're going to become an occupational therapist, you go like it's only a master's level program. Is that correct?
Or? It is, and they're kind of straddling the idea of whether it's a master's as an entry level or a doctorate. Okay. PT had recently switched to a doctorate requirement. And so OT is kind of considering whether or not they need to make that transition as well. Okay, cool.
Now, in regard, I want you to touch on a little bit of like, because I know you worked with a pretty specialized population when you were in OT. So if you don't mind just kind of discussing some of those experiences that you had with the population that you worked with.
Sure. So early in my career, I worked with the, I guess, typical, quote-unquote, typical population for OT. I worked in a hospital setting. I was here in Denver, worked in the neuro unit, had all of our skier versus tree injuries, you know, from over the weekend.
Yeah.
And then moved. So my ex was in the Army.
Okay.
So we moved to Fort Hood, Texas.
Uh-huh.
And I worked in pediatrics for a little bit there, nursing homes, schools. So I've done a lot of traditional OT very early on. And
For
then
sure.
I was recruited to start a OT program for the head injury clinic, the traumatic brain injury clinic at Fort Hood.
Mm.
So that's when I started working with the military population.
Okay.
And again, it was your higher level, so it was a more or less concussion in terms of a head injury on that base. And so those were kind of the patients that I was working with were the ones that had been concussed, most likely in theater, which means during their deployment in Iraq or Afghanistan. And then we did have some stateside, like car accident, head injuries.
Okay.
And then from there, I moved to Tampa, Florida, and worked in the civilian sector again for a few months, and then was recruited for the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center.
Okay.
And they are a congressionally mandated program for the military and VA. And they had 3 pillars, and so it was education, research, and clinical care. And through my 8 years there, I kind of spanned all 3 of those. I was manager of tele-rehab services at one point. I was considered a subject matter expert within head injury and sat on several panels, did a lot of their educational material, got to meet with several high leaders within the military to determine policies and protocols. And then later in that career, I transitioned more into research and had a program that was focused on technology and innovation for severe traumatic brain injury and their caregivers.
So you got to do some pretty fun, cool stuff then, huh?
Yeah, it was an amazing opportunity for sure.
So, you know, working kind of with the military population and then, you know, working kind of on that cognitive side of things, let's talk about maybe like PTSD, right? Because that seems to be terminology that is pretty prevalent out there when we're talking about deployment, military people, but even, you know, outside of military personnel. Kind of like, what's your take on PTSD, and then like how did you as an occupational therapist kind of work through that with your clientele?
Yeah, so PTSD was post-traumatic stress disorder, was something that we saw regularly. On a personal level, I have a hard time believing that we have any soldiers coming back from deployment that don't have some component of it.
Interesting, okay.
Interestingly enough, working in my concussion population, it seemed like there were several symptoms that overlapped. So when I was working on the military base, they really wanted us to isolate the PTSD from the head injury. And as an OT, we truly believe you cannot separate those two things. That is what makes up a person.
Right.
Again, going back to that holistic with the W approach. So we really had to sit there and address both without necessarily going to the root cause, but looking at the symptoms and helping to address those symptoms. I honestly don't know that I had too many patients come in and tell me that they didn't have PTSD. It wasn't necessarily something they wanted to be forthcoming about. But, you know, in them sharing their experiences and their stories, they were in very traumatic situations. Right. And then during my time at Fort Hood, I also experienced trauma and was in the Fort Hood shooting, and so experienced PTSD myself afterwards. And I think that really heightened my sense of awareness and sense of compassion and empathy for my patients. But at the same time, it also taught me that I had a lot of control over that.
For sure, yeah.
You know, obviously I wasn't in control of the situation that happened, but I could choose how I was going to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became very important for me to teach and show my patients that we have a choice to make. So you can either succumb to that tragedy,
Yeah.
Or you can choose to overcome it.
Mm. Now, so what was kind of like, so you just mentioned, like, you know, you said that you had the choice of how you were going to respond, and I'm sure you probably relayed that message to some of your clients and some of the people you were working with after, you know, you experienced that Fort Hood incident. But like, how do you like professionally as an occupational therapist with people that are struggling with PTSD, like what's maybe that first or second step when, you know, somebody's like diagnosed with PTSD, right? And you know, it's proven, all that. What are the first couple of steps that you kind of like give people to kind of start, you know, moving past that or working through it, recovering from it, rehabbing, whatever words that are maybe more politically correct to attach to PTSD, but how do you help somebody get better from PTSD? What are those first couple of steps?
So first, what comes to mind is validation, compassion, and encouragement. Acknowledging that what they experienced was in fact traumatic, and validating the feelings that they're experiencing, and then encouraging them to look forward, you know, future directed. And then going back to the OT side of things, we very much believe in productive, purposeful activity. I think maybe that is where we can improve with that military and veteran population, is I really believe that the more people are productive and they feel that they have purpose, and I think in a lot of instances, and especially in working with my patients, they feel that sense of purpose when they're helping their peers. So if we can set them up in a way in which they feel that there is a reason for getting up in the morning, I truly believe that's the first step in helping them overcome that situation. That's cool,
and I think that's very valuable advice for anybody that's quote unquote struggling in life, right? Like not only people with PTSD, but I know for myself, just as an adult, as a, you know, human being, when I have that purpose in my life and I have that, you know, alignment with my passion and all of that, like it's just like life is so much better, right?
Absolutely.
I feel better, I perform better, I'm more driven, focused, just relationships, everything is so much better. But when, you know, there's like, I know for me personally, you know, I grew up as an athlete. I played 1 year of college football. I quit football. I transferred schools. And after I quit football and transferred schools, that like year and a half, 2 years after I was done playing sports, like those were some of the darkest days of my life. I didn't have PTSD or anything like that, but like I went into some very dark places because my purpose, you know, that those future kind of like those goals, like we were always, when you're an athlete, you're always got, you know, the next goal, you're trying to make it to the playoffs, you're trying to win a state championship, you're trying to get these individual accolades, you know, you've got the workouts, you've got the camaraderie in the locker room, there's just always, there's all these moving parts, you're always moving forward. Talking about kind of like that futuristic thinking, right, you said is so important in regards to PTSD and things like that. So even, you know, somebody that is just maybe going through some dark times in their life, I think we would both agree, Kristina, it's like we've got to take that time to figure out, like, what is my purpose? Like why? Like, why am I here? Like, what are my powers? Like, we really have to dig into, like, what is my existence all about? Because I really feel like once we kind of like latch on or, you know, are enlightened in regards to like our purpose and our why and all of those type of things, like that's where the light begins to shine. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I will say, I think sometimes the idea of identifying what my purpose is and what my why is can be very overwhelming, especially if you are in that like rock bottom space. And so sometimes it's more about what feels, I need to get out and do something, so what's going to feel good. And starting with that. And as you do that, then you continue to do the inner work and you start kind of peeling back those layers and figuring out what your why and your purpose is, but not necessarily. I think some people can get very burdened by this idea of, well, I have no idea what my purpose is, and then they don't move forward because they don't see any way out.
Great point.
So sometimes it's baby steps, you know, just start with something small. What feels good? What would motivate you to get out the door today? For
sure. Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great perspective. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, are you, like, however much you want to share, but like you'd mentioned, you know, this, a toxic relationship in regards to a marriage, right? So, you know, if you don't mind just maybe touching on that a little bit, maybe you like, you know, like why was the relationship toxic and kind of like what did you learn? I don't want to focus necessarily on, you know, that relationship, but maybe, you know, during that season of life, during that marriage, what did you maybe, you know, learn about yourself, or what were you open to? So kind of however you want to navigate that, I would just love to hear maybe like what you learned.
Yeah. I'm still learning.
Yeah.
But
until the day we die, right? Like we got to be
so.
learning. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it's amazing just to have those like kind of light bulb moments, you know, those insights now, looking back that I didn't necessarily have in the moment. And I think, you know, one of the biggest lessons for me that I learned after leaving that relationship was that I did have such a traumatic and turbulent childhood, and I didn't ever take the time to do the work and to heal and to see a therapist and to, you know, process through all of that to get myself to a healthy space. So instead, I went from a very vulnerable, wounded child and got into a relationship at the age of 21. So just a few years in between moving out of the house and, you know, getting into this relationship. And I think because I had not done that work, that was the relationship that I attracted. Yeah. And so, I mean, it was interesting how much that relationship did mimic my childhood. Yeah. And I think a lot of people from the outside looking in, a few things. I think one is they would say, but you always looked so happy. And if it was as bad as you say it was, why did you stay so long? Yeah. And I think for a few things, one is more often than not, a toxic or abusive or manipulative relationship is not always bad. It's not 100% bad. If it were 100% bad, most people either wouldn't enter into that relationship, and they certainly wouldn't stay as long as they do. They're great, you know, pieces of that relationship that I had. I loved being married, but it was a very toxic, codependent relationship. Yeah. And as I had mentioned, you know, I don't know. Some of it probably was from work that I did after the Fort Hood shooting, and then just coming into kind of my own. I never had really developed who I was as a person. And over time, and as I got older, that changed, and I started kind of identifying what it was that I wanted, who I was as a person, what my values were, and then creating that support network for myself. And that is where I finally put my foot down and was like, I'm not doing this any longer, and walked away. So, you know, looking back, there's nothing that I would change. I don't regret it. I learned so much along the way. I've met so many people along the way. And I know that that's just allowing me to take that experience and choose then what I want to experience going forward.
Yeah. Now, will you, from your perspective, because different people have a different perspective on what the word toxic means or toxicity in regards to a relationship, but for you, and again, that's kind of a term that is, has gained a lot of popularity, it's thrown around a lot, right? Get on social media, listen to 100 different podcasts, like you're going to hear, cut out all the toxic relationships, this and that, and everybody's kind of got their perspective and opinion. But for somebody, you personally have used the word toxic in regards to this marriage. So what is that word toxic or a toxic relationship? What does that kind of look like for you personally, just so that somebody that's maybe listening to this can say, hey, like, I'm in a relationship like that. I didn't even realize like it was toxic or it was, bad for me or the other person negative. So for you, Kristina, what is that toxic relationship? What does that kind of entail? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I guess without going too deep into detail, I mean, it was all components of physical, verbal, emotional abuse. Not often physical, but it existed.
Right.
But, to me, and I do think toxic is an overused word these days. But for me, what it means in this situation is both of us had our stuff, our own issues that neither of us had taken the time to work through and address and process. And so we easily triggered one another. And I think that that's where some of the toxicity comes in.
Okay.
Is if you don't know how to approach a conversation, how to, in a healthy way, handle conflict. And so instead of speaking in a mature, open, understanding, compassionate way, you're tearing each other down, belittling. The end goal is to make the other person feel, like dirt.
Yeah.
That, to me, is toxic.
Okay.
It definitely was not a healthy relationship.
Right, okay. Now, I want to talk about, you alluded to this beach breakdown earlier, like the photo shoot. So I just want to kind of come back to that, because what I'm wanting to do, what I'm attempting to do here is just, I want to kind of like paint a little bit of a picture, because you've had so many different life experiences in regards to just, like we just got done talking about that relationship. You had the incident on Fort Hood, and your child, a lot of like maybe tragedy, just a lot of maybe darkness, difficult situations. And for you to be where you're at today, which we're moving in that direction. We're going to talk a lot about who you are today, what you're doing today, how you're serving, how you're giving back, how you're using your powers and all that. But I just want to paint a little bit of a picture of like, what you are stepping into today in regards to kind of like some of the stuff that's happened in the past. So that's why we're kind of bouncing around a little bit, and that's why I'm just asking you. We're not getting deep into the details, right? But I just want the listeners to understand, like, you have been through a lot of things, and there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be able to listen to this, be like, man, like she's been through that, and now she's doing this. Like, it's just really, it can really inspire people and uplift people. So what was the breakdown on the beach, like that photo shoot all about? And then once we get done with that, kind of unpacking that, I really want to go in depth in regards to how you've kind of like pulled yourself up by the bootstrap, so to speak, how you've kind of done that deep inner work and found out who you are today. So what was the beach breakdown, and then we'll transition on from there.
So the beach breakdown. So I'm 36. Like I feel like just starting to figure out who I am.
Yeah.
So and really trying to live up to my authentic self and not the expectations of others. And so similar to what we were talking about earlier, we're in this photo shoot, and it's on the beach. You know, there are certain expectations of what a beach bikini, you know, fitness photo shoot is going to look like. And I didn't feel like I could play that part. I didn't feel like that was me, and I didn't know how to give the photographer what they wanted. And fortunately, two of the other girls that were there came and, like, gave me a pep talk and, you know, said, so I got caught up in just this idea of sexy. And I don't see myself or feel myself as a lot of these, like, Victoria's Secret sexy models. And, like, I just can't play that part. Like, I would seriously have to be acting to do that, and it didn't feel good. So the two girls came and gave me a pep talk and said, look, your sexy is different than our sexy. So you do whatever is sexy for you. And don't try to play the part of somebody else. And then my photographer, I consider him one of my most significant mentors. He had me on the beach, was, you know, giving me cues in terms of posing, and it was like, it just doesn't feel right. And so he said, Kristina, I want you to think about where you have come from and where you are today. That's what's sexy. You are so powerful. You are so strong. That's what's sexy. That's what I'm trying to get out of you. Not whatever you're, you know, these visions dancing around in your head of what should be sexy. Let's pull out that strength and power, because that is what is your sexy. And just to have a photographer understand your story, but be able to kind of pull that power out is incredibly impactful.
So is that, Kristina, like, kind of the expectations of others, or maybe having this, you know, lofty expectation within your own mind of, like, maybe who you should be? Are those a couple things that you've really struggled with throughout your life?
Absolutely. And I would say probably being a huge people pleaser. You know, and growing up in that dynamic. I think it's actually fairly common for kids with divorced parents to seek that validation. I mean, I think a lot of kids seek that validation from their parents. But hopefully it's in a healthy way and you can grow out of that. And I think a lot more people are recognizing that now. But yeah, so I definitely struggled with and probably still do, with this idea of, can I let that go? Can I not feel like I have to get the validation from somebody else to be who I am or do what I want to do?
Do you also, like, do you also struggle with, like, kind of like that worthiness aspect, or that good enough aspect? Like, you know, when somebody like me, like, reaches out to you on Instagram and says, hey, like, I'd love to have you on my podcast, like, are kind of maybe some of those immediate thoughts like, well, why does he want me to have him on his, or why does this guy want me to be on his podcast? Is like, did that happen, or does that happen when people ask you to do, like, certain things?
Always. So I actually have 3 different coaches right now. I have a business coach, I have my physique coach, and then I have like awareness mindset coach. And my awareness mindset coach, he and I work through what he calls dominant negative emotions. And so the 2 that I struggle with the most are I'm not good enough and I'm not lovable. And so we keep plugging along and keep trying to work through those so that I can actually, I can logistically work through that in my head, but I haven't quite accepted it yet.
Right. Okay, so that's a great segue into kind of like where I want to go in regards to where you're at today, what you've got going on. So you've gone through all these different life experiences, right? You have a lot of experiences that a lot of people haven't. So you can relate, I think, to a lot of different people going through a lot of different situations. And so we're just talking about kind of like you have this mindset coach, and you're working through your own struggles with kind of like, thoughts and, dominant thoughts and all that type of stuff. So just for you personally, Kristina, like, where are you taking your mind, on a day-to-day kind of like basis so that you can go where you want to go? So like maybe it's with your coach, like what does he or she, what does your coach have you doing, mindset wise, so that you can kind of break through some of these things that you've struggled with? And like, how is that kind of helping you to step into your present power?
So I think there's a few things. One is falling back on that positivity. So if you have a positive mindset, things are going to be more positive, as my stomach's growling.
That's okay.
And so, it's recognizing when you're in the moment, if you are thinking a negative thought, and stopping yourself and shifting that thought to a positive thought. And then my coach also has me like really recognize and acknowledge when positive things happen. Like put a lot of emphasis on that. And going back to the law of attraction, what you put out comes back to you.
Absolutely.
So if you're putting a lot of emphasis on those positive things, there's going to be more positive that comes
100%,
back.
yeah.
So that's one of the daily, rituals, tasks that we do. And then another that I have found incredibly helpful is intention setting and planning your day. Like literally, which as athletes we used to do this, and I never connected the dots to real life. So in the morning I will visualize what I want my day to go, what I want my day to look like, how I want my day to go, how I want interactions with people to go. And that has become hugely impactful for me. Right. And especially if there is anxiety about a certain situation, or those situations where you're like, I'm not good enough for this, or why would someone want me for X, Y, Z? Sitting there and visualizing how it's going to feel, what the conversation is going to be like, what you want the end result to be. And so that has made a big difference.
Now, you mentioned like your coach is working with you in terms of like when you have maybe some negative thoughts popping up, kind of like right away, inserting positive thoughts. So what does that kind of look like for you? Let's say you have some thoughts, you start kind of maybe getting some anxiety because you think there's some outside expectations on you. You're maybe struggling with some of that people pleasing. So when some of those negative thoughts come up for you, what are like, just like what's maybe like a positive word or what's a positive mantra that you immediately try to insert into your mind to kind of like cut off the negativity?
Lots of mantras.
Yeah. Like I'm beautiful, so like, I'm powerful.
I really struggle with I am beautiful. That one's a really hard one for me. One of his that he has us do a lot, and I usually break down crying when I do it, but it is I fully love and accept myself. So not quite there yet. But let's say like this morning, having some anxiety about the podcast. Yeah. So instead of allowing the what ifs and those fears from setting in, on the drive over here, was practicing, so how do I want this to go? What would feel good about this? And it's easy, it's lighthearted. It's, one of my big ones was staying in my truth. Yeah. But easy is a good one for me. I really like that. I think a lot of interactions feel good when they're easy. So I focus on easy a lot. I have a lot of social anxiety, so that's a big one. Connection is a big one. So, unless there's like specific examples, it's kind of hard to work through what each one would look like.
Can I give you one?
Please.
So you mentioned earlier that like when you were previously married, You said that you enjoyed being married, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and I'm sure, let me ask you this. Do you want to get married again? Like, is that something that's in your heart or not?
I feel very fortunate because I don't feel in a position of pressure.
Uh-huh.
I don't know that I would say yes or no to either one, but I don't at all feel like I think some of my peers feel, where they are like, well, I'm, 36, I need to get married. So my mindset is been there, done that.
Right.
I really want a healthy relationship.
There we go. So let's say you want to be in a healthy relationship. You want to maybe share life with somebody, right? With a significant other. So when maybe that's not happening, or you start to maybe get anxious in regards to kind of like that direction of your life, what do you insert for like that one specifically?
Everything's always working out for me.
Okay, cool.
That's my go-to mantra with that. It's interesting for me to say this because I don't know that a lot of other people feel this way, but I never feel like it's never going to come, it's not going to happen. I believe that every person comes into our life for a reason.
Absolutely.
I believe in lessons. So I think everybody's a teacher. So whether we're the student or the teacher, in every interaction, we play both roles, and there's a purpose for everything. But I'm never worried that I missed out, or I missed my chance, or if it doesn't work out with this person, that it's never going to happen for me. Oddly enough, in my head, it's always the like hot-cold game from when we were kids. And it's like, I know I'm just getting warmer.
Yeah.
You know, I'm getting closer to exactly what it is that I want. So that's kind of my perspective on a day-to-day basis.
Cool. I really appreciate you, Kristina, sharing some of this stuff, because again, this is the type of stuff that's really going to be relatable to other people that are going to listen to your story, right? It's like, man, like, she's been through this stuff. This is how she's working through it. And honestly, to be really honest with you, Kristina, like this is like a big part of like why I love having these in-person conversations with people on the podcast, because like I get to be a student. Like I get to sit here, I get to see like your body language, my other guest body language, which that's very powerful in itself. I get to feel your energy, my other guest energy. There's just so many dynamics that go into human interaction when it's like face to face, and then with the podcast is like I get to hear your story, right? And I get to ask you questions, and I know that as we are having just an adult conversation and you're sharing your story, like other people are going to hear it and they're going to be impacted, right? So like just that human connection element of just like the podcast and the storytelling, like that for me, it's and that learning, that being that student, it's important to me, and it lights me up, So now let's I want to start. So you mentioned earlier that like bodybuilding and that type of environment, the training, I'm sure, and all that, the discipline that goes in that has really positively impacted your life. So kind of when did kind of the whole fitness thing come on the scene? Like when did you really get into fitness? When did you get into kind of like the bodybuilding thing, the competing? And then I want to start talking about kind of like you being a wellness coach, kind of like what your motivation is behind that, what your goal is with that. So when did fitness start becoming a big part of your life? When did you get into like the actual competing in regards to like bodybuilding, physique competitions? And then we'll go from there.
I think fitness has been a part of my life since I was a little kid.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Fitness in the terms of like being physically active.
For sure, yes.
Although I will say my dad bought me the Disney Channel so that I could do mousercise in the mornings on Saturdays. So that was great, and I had the whole like Jane Fonda get up, so leotard tights.
That's awesome.
All that,
yeah.
All that jazz. So fitness has been a part of my life as long as I can remember. My ex was a former bodybuilder and kept kind of pushing me into that world. And it took him a good 10 years to do so. And I had several other people in the gym in the Tampa area that kept kind of mentioning it. And not to go off too much on a tangent, but I had been doing fertility treatments for almost 3 years.
Wow, okay.
And so getting into bodybuilding was kind of my opportunity to myself to take control back of my body. So the fertility treatments were unsuccessful, but all of the drugs and everything that you have to take for that, it completely like manipulates your body and your hormones and your thoughts and everything. And so I felt in a place of being very out of control.
Yeah.
And for me, the world of competing allowed me a sense of control. So then I was able to control my workouts. I was able to control the food that was going in my mouth. And I was able to then see the changes in my body in response to those actions. So that's where it started.
Okay.
And then in 2015 and 2016, I got very serious about it. And worked my tail off, but at the end of my competing season in 2016 was completely burnt out.
Yeah.
And I had gone into it with the idea of it being healthy. I wanted to get myself into a healthy place.
Right, yeah.
And at the end of the day, it was probably one of the most unhealthy things that I could be doing.
Yeah.
And so it was very contradictory to my internal values. And so I looked for a new coach that had similar values to mine, similar beliefs, and ended up changing over to new coach, and I'm still with her. So I haven't competed since 2016.
Yeah.
Have not competed under this new coach of mine, but aside from the pageant last year.
Yeah.
But still looking into it, I think one of my biggest goals after competing was finding balance in a healthy way. And I think for the general population, they think that they have to do extremes to be healthy.
Right.
And you don't.
For sure. Yeah.
And it's actually advantageous not to do extremes. So I really try to promote, just baby steps, small changes, day-to-day, little things that you can implement. But for the sport of bodybuilding, you absolutely have to do extremes.
For sure.
So there are, two ends of the spectrum there, too.
Right. Now, yesterday I was actually having a podcast conversation with a young lady that's here local in Denver, and she's been to the CrossFit Games a couple times, but before she really got into CrossFit, she competed in figure competitions, right? And so we were... and just for context's sake, so that I've competed in drug-free bodybuilding, so I understand all of that type of stuff. But she was just talking about how unhealthy, it really was, right? And I think all of us, for different reasons, want to get shredded, we want to step on stage and all that. And I really do think that it can be competing in physique competitions. It can be a very positive experience. It, competing specifically can teach you a lot about yourself and just a lot about life, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned. But again and again on the podcast and just through my own life experiences, because I've had a lot of, high-level prep coaches here locally in the Denver area on the podcast, and I do a lot of reading. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in regards to competing that the quote-unquote person that's just kind of seeing the pictures on social media, they don't know that it's going on. They don't really get it. They just see when we're on stage and we've got the Instagram photos, we're shredded, we look good, girls got the makeup and we're all tan or whatever. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that is very unhealthy. So from just your own experience, why was kind of the competing after a while, why did that become maybe a negative experience, or what was kind of maybe some of the downsides of, having to control your food and training a specific way and things like that?
I will say I love getting glammed up and being on stage.
Yeah, I like to be shredded. I like to be shredded.
It lasted, you were lucky if you got 2 minutes of stage time for 12 weeks of work.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day. So where and it's funny, so we're 2020, it's been almost 4 years since I've competed.
Yeah.
I still count all of my food. I still meal prep. I'm very strategic about how I eat. I still very much control that. So I don't think that necessarily is the unhealthy part, nor is the workout. My workouts and my food are very much still the same. However, I will say the levels of depletion is where it gets unhealthy, or where it did for me.
Yeah,
so at the end of the day, when I was competing, my last show was in New Jersey in June of 2016. Going into that show, I was doing 3 hours of cardio a day, 2 hours of weights a day, and eating, if I was lucky, 1,000 calories a day. My carbs were nearly non-existent. I was regularly lightheaded. I was in a very high profile, might not be the right terminology, but I was in a position where 2 weeks before I competed, I was presenting to the Secretary of the VA.
Yeah.
I needed to be mentally sharp, and I was not. I could not keep myself together. I was exhausted. I could barely get through my workouts. I was crying trying to get through my workouts. And so none of that piece is healthy in my mind.
Right. 100% right. And just for the listeners out there, and that's why I asked you to kind of share your experience, because the young lady that I had on yesterday, she had a different experience. I've had a different experience, but because a lot of us that have competed in physique competitions, there's a lot of people that develop like eating disorders from it, right? Because for you, kind of like controlling what you're putting in your mouth and being able to manipulate things and kind of feeling in control of some different things, it sounds like overall that's been a beneficial thing for you. But for a lot of people, kind of like that control of like, the food and having to weigh and the macros and training a very specific way. And then, the girl yesterday, she said she was down to like 700 calories a day, which that's just, I'm not going to go out on a tangent with that, but that's just completely asinine. That's completely unhealthy. And but then I know like with females, like you guys, the hormonal imbalances, people losing their periods, just there's a gauntlet, a wide array of different things when you step into competing that and I'm speaking to you, the listeners, that you really need to be aware of. And I think, staying on this topic just for a quick second, when you go out and if you're going to hire a quote unquote coach or a prep coach, really, 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 really do your research, do your due diligence, talk to some of their maybe athletes that used to work with them, because Instagram and social media is going to tell you one story, but then once you actually get behind the curtain or behind the scenes, you're going to probably have a different experience. So please, especially for you ladies out there that are listening to this, do your due diligence in regards to competing, in regards to hiring a coach. And if something doesn't feel right, if your coach is asking you to do something that you're not comfortable doing, don't do it. Don't give in to that. So with that being said, let's move on to Kristina, kind of like where you're at today. So touch on a little bit this Miss Bikini Colorado pageant that you competed in, the title that you won, I believe it was last year. And then let's just talk about, you being a wellness coach, kind of like where are you at? Because from my understanding, just doing a little research before our conversation, you're no longer doing the occupational therapist. So what is the coaching aspect of things? What are you kind of hoping to do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Miss Bikini Colorado 2019, that was an honor. And to be able to represent my home state was so great. So I went down and competed in Miami, Florida last July.
Cool.
And I don't even remember how many girls we had, 55 I think, because it wasn't necessarily just state.
Yeah.
But it was so fun and different from competing, in terms of there wasn't a specific physique look.
Right.
I actually had a lot of health issues going into that last year, so thank goodness there was not a specific physique look. But my coach worked with me, and her goal was to take me in as healthy as I possibly could be. So we worked together on that, and it incorporated a formal gown and theme wear, and then it was 3 full days of bikini shoots.
Wow.
On the beach, pool, everywhere. And so I had the opportunity to meet several photographers, several other women. Many of us still stay in contact with each other, so that was great.
Yeah. So now in regards to kind of like what you're up to at this point in this season of life, you're a wellness coach. I saw some posts on Instagram about working with people specifically online. So kind of like, what are you trying to grow like this online presence, this online business? What's the name of it? Kind of like, what are you doing moving forward with what you got going on career-wise?
Yeah, so I do have a full-time career in sales, and so it's different from what I'm trying to accomplish now. I also used to have a health coaching business in Tampa.
Oh, okay.
And so different from that, I want to help people find a way to heal in a healthy way. So I'm looking, again, going back to that holistic approach, holistic with a W, it's mind, body, spirit. And so I work with my clients to find ways that they enjoy to move their bodies, eat more nutritiously, as well as the mindset piece of it. So trying to get present, grounded, journaling, meditation, we work on all of it. So just allowing people to step into their power and know that they don't need, sometimes you need medications, and sometimes you need other, medical doctors and input, but there is a lot that we can do to heal ourselves too. Sure. And so I want to empower people to understand what those tools and strategies are so that they can move forward when they're ready. For sure.
Now, like, what type of so I just want to get a better understanding for the listeners. So, like, in regards to like clients, in regards to kind of like what you're doing with people through the online medium, what type of individual or what type of coaching are you providing? Like, so what type of individual are you looking to help, empower, and then like what type of coaching? Because I know, again, you get on Instagram and like, I'm an empowerment coach and I'm this coach and I'm that coach. I'm like, what type of education do you have for all that? Which you don't need necessarily education, but you know what I mean? There's all these different titles that we give ourselves, right?
Sure,
so what type of coaching do you provide? What type of individual are you really trying to empower and help?
So my coaching, I say it's more of like an education based.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So I'm really teaching people. I don't want someone who is dependent on a coach for the rest of their life.
Right, of course. So
I really want to teach my clients kind of that underlying why they're doing what they're doing so that they know how to implement those tools and strategies in the future. I do provide workouts. I also provide meal ideas, meal plans. I don't necessarily want to get too caught up in this is what you need to eat because I'm not looking for a client that wants to compete. I'm looking for someone who wants to change their life.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just with that overall goal of being healthy. So I will do macros with a client if that's what they would like to do, but that is not my ultimate goal.
For sure, yeah.
My ultimate goal is to live and find that balance where you feel good and it's sustainable.
Cool. I want to touch on, and we've been going for over 70 minutes here, so we'll kind of start wrapping things up here in a minute. But kind of like at the beginning of our conversation, when I was going through the conversational warm-up questions, we touched on, just a little bit in terms of like communication, but more specifically, you were talking about, listening and actually hearing. We talked about being present, right, when we were having that interaction with other human beings. So in terms of communication, like communication for me in terms of just life and relationships and interactions with human beings, communication is everything, right? Like, I mean, nobody that I bring on my podcast is going to say, no, communication isn't everything. Everybody agrees with me, or we all agree, we're all in alignment with communication is everything. But what are maybe some things, because again, you've had so many unique experiences, you've lived, a lot of life for being only 36, right? You've had a lot of interactions with a lot of different people from the military, and then working with kids, and coaching and competing and all that. So what are maybe a couple things outside of just like, listening to people, really hearing and being present? Because we've already kind of touched on that, but what are maybe a couple important aspects of communication that you found through your experiences in life, through your, careers? What are a couple important aspects of communication that you've kind of like learned or found very valuable in your life?
That's a great question.
Thanks.
Two things come to mind. Mm-hmm. So one is there had been a meme or quote on social media for quite some time that was saying we're always in a conversation, we're always thinking about what to say next instead of kind of giving ourselves a blank slate and truly listening to what the other person is saying. Right. It's a toughie, but I think it is so important to think about that and to really listen and not to be so focused on what our response is going to be. Right, yeah. And then one of the most profound lessons that I learned last year was someone's reaction or response towards me has nothing to do with me. It's all about what's going on internally for them, and they're just projecting that out into the world. And I think that has allowed me grace for both the other person and myself. So if I can remember that in the moment, I can take a deep breath and I can try to hold space for that experience and understand that that person's going through something in that moment, and finding that grace to just allow them to be in that moment and not take that so personally. Now, is that kind of in reference, Kristina, to maybe like a negative situation? If somebody's like maybe bringing some negativity or trying to bring some negativity, maybe you say something and they explode, so to speak, or they get angry. Is that kind of like what you're referring to in regards to like, hey, it's not me, it's them? It doesn't always have to be so extreme. That is the situation in which I learned that lesson. Right. But now being in sales, I mean, it's really kind of the same thing too, right? When you walk into a doctor's office and they tell you no, it really doesn't have anything to do with you. It's whatever story they've created in their head about you, or whatever, or about the service or about a vendor in general. And so it really has nothing to do with you as a person. Cool. Okay, man, we could go a lot longer. Now, I want to touch on the sales thing because, I'm currently doing personal training, right? And a big part of personal training is sales. Like, you have to retain your clients, all this different stuff, right? And a lot of, I think, first of all, a lot of people, there's a negative connotation when you say sales, still in our culture. I think it's getting better, but it's still there. Second of all, I think probably a lot of people in terms of like personal trainers, like they might be a great trainer or a solid trainer, but they really suck at sales. So for you, it's interesting, just as I've heard your story and I'm taking it all in right now during our conversation, you're working through kind of like just like what you've said, like the people pleasing, expectations of others, just some of those personal things that you've been very vulnerable in regards to sharing with myself and the listeners today. I'm thinking like, dang, I'm like, now this girl's like in sales, like I would think that would really like ramp up some of these maybe insecurities or fears or anxieties that you're breaking through, you're working on in your own personal life. Is that true? And then I also know though that as we step into the fire, as we put ourselves in uncomfortable situations, I firmly believe that's really where true breakthrough happens in regards to insecurities, fears,
the anxiety and all that type of stuff. It's like, I know for me, when I step into the uncomfortable, when I lean into it, when I feel it, when I just like, you know what, I'm not going to allow this to control me, and I go into the uncomfortable, that's where I really have the control, the power, and breakthrough happens for myself personally. So is that kind of like what you've been experiencing in regards to sales? Have you like really, maybe some of these struggles that you've had over your life, have they really come to a head? And then have you found that as you are going through sales, as you're really leaning into these things, is there a breakthrough happening? Does that make sense?
100%.
Okay,
yes.
Good.
Yeah, just kind of laughing as you're saying all of that. So another favorite quote of mine is, growth doesn't come from comfort zones.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Man, I struggle with sales. So, and it's funny because I was like, I'm definitely one of those people that suck at sales. But then at the same time, hearing my coach in my head, if I keep telling myself that story, that's going to continue to be my reality.
100%. Yeah.
So I have to stop myself in this very moment and say, that's not my story.
Amen.
I'm learning how to be great in sales.
Absolutely.
I am the best salesperson for the role that I am in. You know, you have to shift that story
Absolutely.
around. So I am learning there. Yes, I struggled a lot, especially being in more of, I feel, a serving, helping role before, where people look to me to help them, and then going into sales where there is that negative connotation.
For sure.
And that totally highlights tons of my insecurities. However, I was very lucky. Our company has grown tremendously over the last year, and recently we hired an entire executive team. Prior to that, I was reporting directly to my CEO.
Wow.
So he and I were having regular meetings because he also kind of doubted what I would be able to do in this space. And so he would encourage me and try to give me tips and strategies. But every single time I saw him, he said, Kristina, your job is not to go out there and sell something. Your job is to go out there and make friends. I was like, oh, I can go make friends. I can't sell for, anything, but I can go make friends. Yeah. And so that's really been my focus. And I know from my previous career, like, rapport is big for me, and I can build rapport with people. So that's really where my emphasis has been. And I think for personal trainers, it's the same thing.
Absolutely.
You're not selling them a product, you are creating a relationship. And that's where it's going to come in. Yeah.
That's good. That I'm excited for you, because like because I didn't find any of the sales stuff like on your social media, so I didn't know that. I know that you had stepped away from being an occupational therapist, but like as you've just like unpack your story, and then you're in sales, I'm like dang, like this has to be like difficult but I absolutely love, because you're 100% right. And I'm sure some of this is coming from the coaches in your life, which is great. And that's why coaching is very valuable, or at least having some sort of mentorship. But like for me, 2019, the one word I used to describe 2019 for me personally was breakthrough. Because there's a lot of just personal breakthroughs. And a lot of it was changing the story that I was telling myself about something in my life. So I won't go down this because I've shared a little bit probably on the podcast, and I don't want to go down that trail right now. But just like, you are so 100% right, Kristina, and I'm right with you. Like, the law of attraction, like whatever you are putting out into the universe, into the world, that is what you're going to get back. And it's like, for me, like when I'm personal training, it's like, all I want to do is train. Like, I don't want to try to sell, but it's like, we have to learn, to shift our mindset and the words that we are telling ourselves, because that is, like you've very well put it, that is what is manifested in our lives, right? And it's like, I'm sure for you, through the different things you've gone through, like I'm just excited, because like you've learned that, like, yes, you've gone through all these things, but you don't have to stay there. Like the things that I broke through in 2019 is like, there were so many stories that I told myself from a very young age. And it's like, I don't have to stay there. I don't have to be that person. I don't have to be stuck. And that's the thing for like the listeners is like, wherever you're at, like, you know, if you are not getting in your life what you want, relationships, finances, you know, career, it's like we need to shift the stories that we're telling ourselves. And once we do that, which it takes time, and it takes a lot of work, but once we do that, then we'll begin to receive like what we want, right? So like I'm just so excited that you've realized that you're sharing that you're putting that out there, because like sales is it's a great opportunity. Like and that's something that I'm really learning is like, you know, like I have to do some cold calls at the gym, and it's like, you know what, I tell myself, I'm like, I love connecting with people. I love talking to people. I love, you know, calling people. I'm just like feeding myself these positive thoughts, because the anxiousness is there. The like, I don't want to do this. This is dumb. I'd rather be trained. It's like, no, I'm not allowing any of that into my mind. I'm going to recondition my mind. I'm going to retrain my mind. I love this. It's so powerful. It's so interesting. So for you, kind of like this, what you're stepping into, has it really kind of like all began and will continue, do you believe, with your mindset?
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Mindset is everything.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's something, like, I have this, when I was a teacher, like I teach, because I take a holistic approach to physical education, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would, you know, teach my kids or share with my kids what I call the health foundation. And it used to be, I'm in the process of shifting this, it used to be sleep, nutrition, movement, and mindset, right? Those are like, I would say to my kids and to just people, like those are the 4 pillars of what I call the health foundation. Yeah. Well, as I'm learning and as I'm growing as a human being, I'm like, you know what? Mindset needs to go first. So now it's going to be mindset, sleep, nutrition, movement. Like those are the 4, from my perspective, the 4 pillars of what I call the health foundation. Because I'm just like, I can't any longer say that sleep is the most important thing for health, because I firmly believe that mindset, because everything starts with mindset. Like you have to alter your mindset. Like if you need to sleep more, it's like you need to alter your mindset. If you need to eat better, you have to alter your mindset. If you need to lose weight, you need to alter your mindset, right? So
I agree with that, but I think they're so intricately intertwined.
Absolutely,
that I cannot put a numerical order on
right,
that.
Right.
Because if you don't sleep, your mindset is not
You're
going
right.
to be there. You're not going to be able to be strong in that position of your mindset. You're not going to actually have that ability to change your thoughts from negative to positive. For sure. If you haven't been
That's a good
rested.
Point. Yeah, I like it.
Nutrition. You have that gut-brain axis. So if you're not giving yourself the right nutrients, again, that's going to alter your mindset.
Sure.
If your mindset's in a bad place, you're going to eat poorly. You know, all of it is just so intertwined that it's hard to delineate one from the other.
Yeah, you're right. That's good. I like it. I'm still going to take mindset first, just because I'm like, dude, like it all starts with the mind. But yeah, and my point isn't to necessarily like say that maybe one's better than the other. Like you're right. They all formulate the health foundation. I just feel like there's just certain steps before we start like going crazy in the gym. It's like, whoa, let's take a step back. Let's look at the mind. Let's look at the sleep. Let's look at the nutrition. So, but yeah, that's a great perspective. Great point. Now, we've had a very thorough conversation. We've touched on a lot of things. I just want to give you, Kristina, kind of an opportunity before I ask the last question. Is there anything that you would kind of like to leave the listeners? Maybe something that's just burning inside of you. Maybe there's just maybe a word. Maybe there's just something that you want to like kind of put out to the world before we wrap things up.
Nothing's jumping out.
Okay.
This has been a great conversation. I'm very appreciative for all of it.
Yeah, and you're very welcome. So I just want to ask you, in closing, Kristina, what sets your soul on fire?
Helping others.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's so much more that I can do, and unfortunately I get wrapped up in so many different ways in which I can help others, but I know that my purpose on this earth is to serve.
Cool. Beautiful. All right. So if somebody, which I know there's going to be people, have just found your story very impactful and encouraging, uplifting for them, if they want to follow along, if they want to find out more about your coaching, just kind of like, see what's up with you, where can people follow along, find out more about you, Kristina?
So the easiest place to connect with me is on Instagram.
Okay.
My Instagram is Kristina Marie Fit, and it's Kristina with a K.
Mm-hmm.
I also have another Instagram profile that I am in the midst of building, and it is Rise Up Thriving. And that is going to be more stories of hope and healing. And then my business, I'm just getting my website worked on, and so it is risefunctionalwellness.com. My business is Rise Functional Wellness, and so once I have the website up and running, it'll be linked in my bio on Instagram.
Awesome. So I just want to thank you, Kristina, for just your authenticity today. I want to thank you for sharing your story, being vulnerable. You definitely have had a lot of life experiences, and you've learned so much. So I just really appreciate you sharing your story and just spending the time with me, just to connect and again, just that vulnerability. It's so powerful. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It was truly an honor.
For sure. So 127 Fit podcast listeners, once again, I just want to thank you for your listening ears. They're always greatly appreciated. Thank you for hanging out with Kristina and myself today on the 127 Fit podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the guests or myself that I am bringing onto the podcast, you can find all of that information on Instagram at 127Fit. Facebook is at Quentin Vars. LinkedIn is Quentin Vars. If you guys would do me a huge favor and please leave a 5-star rating and review, and also subscribe to the podcast, specifically and especially on the Apple Podcast app, that would be super cool. The more specifically, I think now the algorithm, from what I've heard, is subscriptions and written reviews. That kind of allows more people to find the podcast. The more people that find it, listen to it, the more people are going to be positively impacted. That's the name of the game for the 127 Fit podcast. If you think you would be a great guest, or if you have a friend or an acquaintance you think would be a great guest or guest for the 127 Fit podcast, you can send me an email or give this email out. The email is 127fit@gmail.com. And one other huge favor I'd ask of all of my listeners, as you are finding great value in a specific episode or episodes of the 127 Fit podcast, I would just ask that you would take that specific episode or episodes and share it on your Facebook and Instagram stories using the hashtag #BeSomeoneToFollow. And per the usual, I will leave you with Proverbs 24:10, which states, "If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small." This time, until next time, I will catch you guys later.